everybody. Wow.
Welcome to Budapest, Dave.
Thank you. Let's see if this is... Thank you. I must say, first off, I don't think I've ever started a show and been the last one at the show, so welcome to everybody. Thank you for being patient. I do have a good reason. I was in a small group chat with the Prime Minister next door just now, and that guy's got an awful lot of security. There was no way they were letting me out of the room, so I appreciate your patience, and it's good to be here with everybody, so thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I take it away?
Take it away, Dave.
All right. Well, it really is. It's a pleasure to be here. Back at the Danube Institute, I was here about 2 years ago and gave a talk. I do recognize a few familiar faces, and I think I saw some of you at CPAC earlier today. I really, in just maybe 10 days that I've spent in this country, I really have a wonderful affinity for this country and this city, and clearly the fight that you guys have taken on, and just spent an hour with your Prime Minister, who was so unbelievably impressive to stay with, really. He deserves the applause, even though he got me here a little late. He was so impressive, not only talking about what the issues are. I mean, everyone knows what the issues are, right? The issues are immigration and migration, and there's economic issues, and there's obviously Russia, Ukraine, and all of those things. But listening to him just for this last hour talk about the philosophic roots of why he thinks the way he thinks, and some of the reasons that he's doing the pro-family policies here in Hungary, and just things that are just not really talked about that much at the national level. So it was a pleasure to be there. And just generally speaking, when I come here, I find the people, you're all in the fight. You know, I travel all over the world, and there's a lot of countries right now that the people, they're kind of nervous about the direction their countries are going. And I just spent a couple weeks in the UK, and you walk around London and you talk to these people, and there's a real feeling that they're giving their country away, or perhaps that they've actually given it away already, and that there isn't much hope. And it's like that, obviously, in other parts, particularly I would say in Western Europe. You know, there's certainly a feeling of that in France, there's a feeling of that in Germany, but it doesn't feel like that here. It feels like you guys have kind of stemmed the tide that was coming, and it does seem to be working. You're paying a price for it. I did not know until this morning that Hungary pays the EU 1 million euros a day penalty because of your status, or because of your closed borders position, which is absolutely psychotic. I mean, from an American position, that's completely crazy. I mean, you have every right to defend your nation as you see fit. Hungary is for Hungarians, and you can decide who's going to be a Hungarian, and someone can't just walk over your border. The idea that you are now paying 365 million euros a year to an organization that, in essence, is working against you and your country, and is certainly no fan of the man I just spent an hour with, is really crazy. But you have a leader now who's fighting against it. And we know, from an American perspective, we know a little bit, I would say, about having a leader who is fighting against the entire monster, right? I mean, Donald Trump, it's really incredible. It was incredible what this guy did, at least for the first 2 years of his first administration. And certainly, I don't know that any president in my lifetime, and probably in anyone here's lifetime, that has done more in the barely 200 days that he has been in office. And you can feel it also. I mean, I talked to dozens of people today from all over the world, and you can really feel, it's like, if America is back, if America comes back, if we start to lead again, if we start to fight for the right things, particularly on the immigration front, and I would say secondly, but you could probably argue it would be first, on the free speech front, if we can lead on those two things specifically, it really does feel like the rest of the world will follow. Some of these countries, as we just discussed with the Prime Minister, feel like they might just fall on their own sword. It might just kind of be over, and they're going to look demographically and culturally very, very different than we've known them to be. UK probably at the top of that list. But some countries will fight. And I love, you know, as someone that lived in California for many years during COVID, and I fought very hard against draconian lockdowns and mask mandates and injections and all of those things. And I'm very proud to say that I am not vaxxed. I hope I'm okay here to be not vaxxed. That's okay. We can still be. Thank you. But it wasn't that easy to say that in California. So I'm used to fighting against things. I fought very hard to change a lot of the policies in Florida. I campaigned against Gavin Newsom, who's the governor of California. He won his recall election and then won another election subsequently. So some places in the world have made their decisions. They want big government. They seemingly want all of the immigration. They want boys to be girls. They want to be upset and to denigrate their past. And they want to pave a future that is, although they would argue, utopian in nature, that, as you guys probably are well aware, there's no such thing as utopia. But the quest to utopia often ends with dystopia. And to be in Hungary, where you're fighting, it reminds me of where I live now. I live in the free state of Florida. That's what we call it, the other promised land. And I live in a place now that is fighting, that has competent governance, that has borders that it's protecting. We've got our own Coast Guard. We've got good geography because we're a peninsula. We don't have crime all over the place. We don't have the rampant homelessness. Actually, the last trip that I did was just a week ago. I was in Austin, Texas. And I'm guessing most of you haven't been to Austin, Texas, but when you think about Texas, you probably think about cowboys and horses and barbecue and American freedom and big flags and all of those things. And that's all right, except Austin, Texas actually is the one sort of liberal, lefty, progressive, whatever you want to call it, place in Texas. And it was completely taken over by homeless people and drugs everywhere, and it sort of looked like a zombie movie. That's where I was last week. And then last night, we did a few events, and I walked through Budapest last night, and it was peaceful. And it was very obviously safe, and this is a place where things are flourishing. As I understand it, I guess some of the local governance here is a little more to the left, but I can tell you guys, for whatever screwy things you might see going on here, this is a really, really wonderful place to live. I see a lot of you nodding in agreement with that, and it's very, very obvious from an outsider. Yeah, that applause should be for you because it is on you. You guys made this happen. Having talked to Prime Minister Orban just now, he has stood up to a machine that is unbelievably powerful. It's the same machine that Donald Trump stood up to. It's the same machine, by the way, that any of you who have fought the woke machine in any way, any of you that fought something at your kid's school or fought something at the university or fought some gender nonsense or whatever it might be at or a DEI initiative, if that's what you guys call it here, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you fought those initiatives when they were at your job or your workplace, we've all been part of this thing, and we're all fighting this thing together. And I can tell you in my decade plus of doing this right now is the most hopeful I've ever been for any of this. My good friend Pete Boghossian is here, and he and I have been fighting a lot of this woke stuff for well over a decade. And when we were first fighting, it wasn't even called woke. It was identity politics. It was this amorphous thing that everyone knew something was kind of wrong. There's this group of people constantly telling Americans that we're all racist and boys are girls and everything is backwards. We didn't know exactly what it was. And then over the last couple of years, and I would say sort of fueled by COVID, it became just ubiquitous everywhere. And then we all started realizing we were fighting this thing together. So again, when I come to a place like Hungary, and then I talk to people like you, I am telling you, there is a chance to fix the world right now. The European Union and some of those countries are not going to fix themselves. A lot of them won't. Some of them may get there. Some of them may get there, and I'm sure some of the guests tonight will discuss some of that stuff. But you guys are really, if America's ground zero for the return of Western values, of classical liberalism, which I would say at this point has to meld with conservatism if the West is to continue. If America's the epicenter for that, you guys are kind of the epicenter in this part of the world, right? I'll take two epicenters in this sense. So to that note, we have a great show for you tonight. We've got about 10 guests. Because I was late, there was no run-through for today's show. I am just going to figure it out. Are you guys with me? You're going to be with me for the adventure here? All right, great. So we're going to figure it out. We've got some great guests, some of whom I've met before and interviewed before and done shows with before and been on the road with before, some of whom I've never met before. But we're just going to talk it all out. Hopefully we'll get you guys involved to some extent. And I'm going to take a seat right here like Johnny Carson. If this was 1975, I would have a cigarette. It would be odd if I started smoking at 49 years old. That would be a little weird. And we're gonna bring on a whole slew of people. So again, I'm very, very happy to be here. I thank you guys for your patience. I really appreciate it. And we will go from there. Pretty good.
Very good. Sounds great to me.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to start. Let me pull out some of the notes here. Okay. So I think we are going to bring on first Cecília Hazai, who is the creator of the film Rise of Raven. And I think, yep. And I believe we have a promo of the film before we get to it.
I sent some, yeah.
You sense a promo? Let's throw to the promo.
A nemzet egy, és a nemzetnek része Magyarország minden gyermeke. Mindenki.
Az ellenség itt a határban, ti meg dorbézoltok, mint ha nem lenne holnap.
Önök lehet, hogy nem is lesz.
Nem láttad a birodalom erejét. Ezt a háborút nem nyerhetitek meg.
Non vi meritate neanche l'inferno! Quindi ci sono stretti, tesoro!
Tudod te egyáltalán milyen az, amikor bármit megteszel a fiadért?
Ti leszek a hangom.
Ti leszek az én dühöm!
I have to say, Cecília, I did get to see the trailer before just now, and it's very rare, as someone that lived in Hollywood, that I watch anything that comes out of L.A. these days that looks powerful and emotional and sort of grasps a moment. I suspect this was not made in sort of the traditional Hollywood way of making films. And really, what was the genesis of this?
Well, the whole show was shot here in Hungary, and this is one of our tremendous source of pride that we are able to deliver this quality of filming. But we always tell other people's stories, Hollywood movies, Hollywood series. We work for them as slaves, so to speak, but now we were able to tell our own story and to share it with the world. I think it's a very important subject. You were touching on migration and on all these problems. We never intended to have any political undertone to the show, but it begs for explanation. You know, when you say, okay, stop the migrants at the borders, why do we have a fence? For 500 years, this has been our problem. And we had a Hunyadi to stop this migration. For 70 years at least, he stopped the Ottoman invasion, and the Ottoman invasion was followed by many other invasions. So we have, this is an inherent problem. It's in our DNA, and we will fight it.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting you say that because I remember during Trump's first go-around, you know, he was saying, build the wall, and the number one show on television at that time was Game of Thrones, where, of course, the good guys were building the wall, and we had this very strange split between what people thought artistically was okay and true versus what was politically okay and true. But tell me a little bit more about what it's like to make movies and make TV shows here, and how, because Hollywood obviously is changing and there's been a massive decentralization and technology is changing,
Yes,
how that is.
Hungary is a very popular place for filmmaking. We are the most popular place on continental Europe, and the second most popular after England. We have the technology, we have excellent people, crew and writers, and everybody speaks perfect English. We really have everything a filmmaker's heart desires. So, yes, people love to film here, and we have a very good tax rebate system that makes it financially interesting for other outside productions. And we also have our own film industry telling Hungarian stories. So, yeah.
And how is technology changing making films now? Because so much in terms of AI, you can do a lot more with cameras now. I mean, there's just so many ways things are changing so quickly.
I always say you can be scared of AI or you can embrace it and use it to your benefit. It's always a choice. You have to use it in a smart way, not to hurt people, not to hurt the creative process. But my professor who taught me screenwriting, he said a few weeks ago, listen, I already teach at my film academy AI, because in a few years there'll be two kinds of filmmakers, the ones that know how to use AI and the ones that are looking for a job.
Yeah, how worried are you about that as a filmmaker? I mean, in essence, everyone will be able to, type a few sentences into Grok or ChatGPT, and we're gonna basically cater all of our entertainment to ourselves.
It's one step at a time, but I think entertainment is creating emotions, so I think we humans are the ones who create emotions. Maybe an AI will tell us, will give us an outline of a film, maybe, but we have to fill it with emotions.
Is there a Hungarian export that Americans should know about that we don't know about? I'm sure you've got a long list.
Hungarian films outside Hungary few are very popular. Some won an Academy Award. The recent one was Son of Shaul. But in other categories like set design and costume, we won Academy Awards. But the Hungarian film as such doesn't really travel internationally very far. Some art house films maybe, but I guess our show will, and
well, that's why I'm asking. I mean, do you think that could change
because
of the themes? Because of the themes.
Yeah, this show is. I think it has a very international appeal. You don't have to know the historic facts to understand the intrigue, the challenges, the love story, of course, and. So we strongly believe this show will travel, and we have seen the first signs. In Slovenia, it went through the roof. The time slot it's in has tripled the audience. ORF just finished broadcast. They're super happy. Germany starts next week. It's on in Israel. Starts in Croatia next week. Slovakia and Czech Republic. So we are on a roll, huh?
Feeling pretty good then.
Yeah, we have also an American network looking at it right now.
That was
my fingers crossed.
That was my next question. I mean, how do you get Rise of Raven to Netflix or Hulu?
I can't reveal any more details, but yes.
Yeah. So must be a pretty exciting time for you. I would imagine are you working on other projects at the moment, or you're just all in now and?
Well, I thought that after the premiere we can relax a little bit, but no, the workload has doubled everywhere. You're invited with your actors and talk and more talk, but it's fun, I guess. It's like when the writer writes a book and then he's at his book signing, which is a bit boring, but that's fun. That's the moment.
Never complain when they're showing up for you. That is the greatest honor that.
And another interesting thing I just realized with this show, for the last 10 years, everybody has been talking cord cutting, no more linear television, we all just stream our content, etc. Now, in the 3 territories that have run the show so far, it was the very traditional 1 or 2 episodes a week. Every Saturday, you sit down at the same time and watch your show. And it worked. So against scheduling against such a main tide, actually, it shows that the product was really good. People sat down every Saturday or Sunday or Monday to watch our show.
Do you think that some of the cultural confusion that we're having all over the world is partly because we've gone to everything on demand? So back in the old days, everyone watched Sopranos in America on Sunday nights, or you watched, The Simpsons on Thursday nights, or whatever it was. And then the next day at work, you would talk about those things, where now you can basically watch them in a weekend and everyone's on a different schedule. And it's just another thing that we kind of don't have in common, in some sense, just purely because of timing.
Yeah, it's kind of sad that it's lost, but again, I always say it's not the how and the when and through which device, it's the content that speaks for itself. And when you have such strong content like Rise of the Raven, people will talk about it at their workplace, over the internet. We had a screening of episode 10 before it aired on television in 18 movie theaters. And it was very cool when the show finished and all these people went out to the street and they filled the cafes around the movie theater and everybody was talking about this show. It was amazing.
I mean, that's basically as good as it gets. Everyone, please give Cecília a nice round of applause.
Thank you.
All right, Adam LeBor, come on back up. I didn't mean to skip over you there. Adam's obviously a journalist and author right here in Budapest. What's the tone in Budapest these days? What do I need to know before I head out on the mean streets tonight?
I think you need to know that there's really great nightlife here, and you've arrived at just the right time of year, because the Romkerts, the ruin pubs, which are kind of famous around the world, in semi-dilapidated apartment buildings, they're all coming to their own this summer. So you've arrived at the right time for some good nightlife.
It seems just the buzz that I was talking about in the opening, that people are just out and about, and it's kind of pleasant, and it's happening. I don't know if that strikes you as odd or unique or something even worth mentioning, but I'm telling you from an American perspective, it really does feel a little bit different.
I grew up in London and spend a lot of time in London, and the contrast is very marked, that you can walk around in Budapest at night. You feel the atmosphere, you feel the history, you see what happened here, if you know what happened here during the war, during the revolutions. It's such a rich, almost dense atmosphere. If you have some imagination and some knowledge, you get a real sense, almost like time travel. Whereas it's the other thing that you say correctly is that it's a very safe city. I mean, look, there is crime here. There's petty crime. People do get pickpocketed or whatever, but you're not getting the level of endemic violence that you get in London now, unfortunately. I mean, I heard the other day that in London now, each year, there's something like 32,000 incidences of knife crime a year. Yeah. That's 45 a day, because I actually worked it out. It doesn't mean 45 people a day are being stabbed, but knives are being pulled out.
Right, and the solution seems to be that they want knives that will have blunt edges.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
Literally what they're...
Absurdities, absurdities like that. Yeah. But, I mean, I think for me, one of the great things about Budapest, which I've been living here on and off since the 1990s, was always that sense of history. This very strong sense of history that these were the streets where the Nazis invaded. These are the streets where the Russians came, where the fighting was. The walls of this building that we're in now, is a historic building that during the war was fought. Everywhere around here was fought over literally inch by inch. That's one of the things I looked at in my book, which you have there. Be very happy to give you a signed copy.
I will take a signed copy. Yeah. I will take a signed copy. So I'd much rather talk about the positives related to Hungary and Budapest, but one other thing, since you mentioned London. Yeah. Are you as pessimistic as I presented up top? Because when I was there a few months ago, the feeling from the average person in London, and I wandered the streets and I chatted with people, and people came up to me and said hi and said, "Man, we've really lost our country."
I think there is a sense of pessimism and gloom, yeah. I think the thing that drives people really bananas, which we talked about before a little bit, before you got here, is this flotilla of boats. Every day boats come in. And, for my generation, we were raised on the Second World War. My relatives, my father fought for Britain. and you can't understand it. Like, how come every day these boats are coming and these people come in and we've got no idea who they are, and they're picked up by the Navy and put in hotels and have a very comfortable life, and it's not, you're not really allowed to talk about it. You know, you think, like, where, and if you talk about it, everyone says, oh, you're really right wing, but it's not right wing. It's not right wing or left wing. It's just a normal thing that you think your country should be protected, its borders should be protected.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You know, I was struck actually by sitting down with your prime minister a few minutes ago that he basically said some version of that. A lot of the questions, there were a few other people that were there asking questions around the table, and a lot of the questions were about immigration and borders and all of this stuff. And every time he answered something, there was this feeling of, well, I'm just doing the right thing. It isn't something magical. It's just something that we all knew that for some reason good people seem unable to deal with right now. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the book.
So the book is kind of the culmination of my many years living in Budapest. It's called The Last Days of Budapest, and it's the first book that tells the story of the city throughout the Second World War. So there's many books in English. There's many books obviously been written about Budapest and the Second World War, and many by Hungarian historians whose work I'm very happy to acknowledge in the book as well. But no one's tried to tell the whole story of the city. There's books about the Holocaust, there's books about the military side of things, the siege, but what I do is kind of weave it all together through the lives of the people that lived and died at that time.
Give me one great story of one of those people.
Well, I can give you one great story. Was just down the road from here in the Andrássy Palace, which is by the Chain Bridge, literally 5 minutes walk from here. You go down the hill, you'll see a building there, and on the back side of the building on Főutca, so it has two entrances, one on Főutca on First Street and one on the other side by the river. There's a plaque in Polish and Hungarian, because that building was the center of an almost unknown rescue operation where Hungarian aristocrats and Hungarian officials were working with the British Embassy to bring in tens of thousands of soldiers and from Poland and Jewish refugees as well into Hungary and take them to Yugoslavia. I thought I knew a fair bit about the Second World War, but I'd never heard of that before. Most people have never heard of that. Many Hungarians have heard of that. But to me, that was an extraordinary story and a really good example of how every building in this city, especially in the inner city, around the river, downtown, has an incredible story to tell.
Well, it sounds wonderful. I look forward to getting my signed copy and taking a read. Give a nice round of applause to Adam, everybody. All right, and next up, I believe we have former Australian Prime Minister, who I had the honor of sitting down with earlier today, Tony Abbott. Tony! There you go. I feel we need intro music for everybody. What would be your intro song?
Oh, gee whiz. Waltzing Matilda, I suppose.
I just handed you that one. Well, we did get to spend some time earlier today, so I'm going to have to try to keep this fresh for us unless we replay the interview. Well, what excites you about Hungary right now? I mean, why are you here, and what do you feel about this country?
Well, Dave, look, under Viktor Orban, Hungary has been, I think, a shining light for robust conservatism. Two respects particularly. Orban has basically stamped out illegal migration on land, and that's harder than stopping illegal migration by boat, which is what Australia did under my government. The other thing he's done, he's made a determined effort to try to increase the birth rate. And the truth is that the West is committing demographic suicide because we're not having enough kids. Orban is trying to make it easier for intact families to have more kids, and good on him for having a go. So I'm going to say something a bit contentious. Some people say that Orban is the European Trump. I think Orban's better than Trump, to be honest.
Wow.
Because I think he is a sophisticated, intelligent, thoughtful, considered politician in a way that, for all his many impressive strengths, Trump is not. Trump is instinctual. he's hot one day, he's cold the next, and you never know whether it's going to be one thing or the other. And Orban's not like that. He's consistent, he's considered, and you know where he stands.
You know, it's so interesting you say that, because having just sat with him, one of the things I was thinking during the conversation was that the way he was able to sort of weave between his philosophic and his religious beliefs beyond just politics. It's one thing to talk about politics, but to connect all of those things with history, it was rather remarkable.
Now, I'm not saying that Trump is not intelligent. I mean, obviously he's an extremely shrewd, very, very smart guy, but he's instinctual and intuitive. He's not particularly thoughtful, considered. I don't imagine that he's read his way through political philosophy. I don't imagine that he's immersed himself in history. Now, I don't want to sound like an intellectual snob, because there's a lot of leadership that is not any of these things. In the end, you've got to be able to convert all of your learning, such as it is, into a political program that's saleable to the public. But look, Orban, he's been elected 4 times. He had a period earlier which ended in defeat, and he's come back. So we're talking about a remarkable political phenomenon.
Let's talk a little bit about your country, because as we discussed earlier today, Australia seems particularly confounding to people, because on one hand there's the idea of Crocodile Dundee and Steve Irwin and animals and kangaroos and this free-spirited Australian who's surfing and, you know, drinking Fosters and all of that stuff. And then on the other hand, we see a version of Australia that not only has its own migration issue that you hit on earlier, but also just went through some of the most draconian lockdowns in the world, which seems so counter to the idea of what most of us, I think of Australians.
Well, Dave, you're absolutely right. My wife and I have been living for about 35 years in Forestville, which is a nice, peaceful suburb of Sydney. And in all of that time, we'd never had one visit from the police. 3 times during COVID, wow, the cops turned up, heavily armed, riot gear, to investigate breaches of the lockdown law.
Wow.
Now, I don't say
what kind of parties were you throwing?
Well, no. On one occasion, it was thought that I might not have adequately adhered to the quarantine laws for returning travellers. On another occasion, it was thought that I might have broken the rules by riding my bike too far away from my house. And on a third occasion...
Wait a minute.
And on
Did they know who you were?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the problem. I'm not anonymous. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened. But nevertheless, and the third occasion was I was seen maskless for too long. I was ordering a coffee, and I didn't put the mask back on quickly enough.
Wow.
So these were serious offences for which I got a $500 fine. And as I said, 3 visits from the riot squad. Look, it was an insane time. And instead of carefully looking at what we did and what we overdid, there's now a collective amnesia about this whole period. And I just think that the problem with that is that if we ever have another pandemic, we will do the same damn stupid thing again, as opposed to getting on with life. I mean, it's interesting looking at Celia's, the short for your movie. It does look like a terrific movie. It really does. I mean, it looks just as good as Game of Thrones, which I loved. But obviously in those times, people thought that there were things worth dying for. And the trouble with COVID was, and maybe this is a product of this faithless age, people, they lived in fear of dying. And there's no point living in fear of dying. You've got to live each day to the full and try to pack your life with as much good as you can. And if you live in fear of dying, you're not living at all.
Cecília, maybe your next movie, I know you're a little busy. Maybe the next film could be about the former prime minister who had a cup of coffee without a mask. That could be
Yes, it was filtered coffee if I'd had the mask on.
I have a friend, he smoked cigars, so he had a mask.
He cut a hole.
Yeah, my friend, he smoked cigars, so he had a mask that you had a little opening, like a window, so he could smoke a cigar.
My favorite story of COVID, maybe you guys got it here too, was there was a video going around the States of a guy who was on a flight who decided to very slowly eat French fries, and he was basically smoking his French fries while he was on the plane. That was pretty clever. So what is the state of Australia now? So you get out of this sort of craziness. It does seem like it's kind of returned to at least some level of normalcy. But as we're watching all of these Western societies go a little wacky, where are you guys at right now?
Look, I think we suffer from all of these spiritual... we are part of the spiritual malaise of the Anglosphere, full of self-doubt and existential angst about our country. America is angsting about slavery. Britain is angsting about the empire. We're angsting about Indigenous dispossession. But I think our mood is better. Now, maybe that's because the weather in Australia is more like the weather in Florida than in England, for instance, or in much of the United States. Our mood is better, but I think our general intellectual disposition is poor. And I think the great challenge for all of us right now is to snap out of it, is to just snap out of it. I mean, countries like Britain, Australia and America are the least racist, most colourblind countries on earth. We are, at heart, the freest, the fairest and the most prosperous societies on earth. We've been incredibly creative. And we should we should accept that and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah. Pete, we will pick up on that momentarily. That was a hell of a clap. What do you think that is? I mean, you sort of mentioned a spiritual malaise, or there's almost a post-Christian version of all of this. I mean, is this also just part of a function of modernity? We're distracted on our phones, and there's endless scrolling, and we just have a lot of other stuff to fill up the brains that used to go to more important things.
Look, it's a very good question. Why do we have a mental health epidemic, for instance? Why are young people in Australia living in such a wonderful country, so materially well off, why are they so full of anxiety, even crippling anxiety? I think it's this loss ultimately of a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. And it's almost like in the old days we had more Christian faith. I don't want to sound preachy, but we did have more Christian faith. And life was more of a struggle. And if you've got to struggle from day to day, that gives you a meaning and purpose. But if you no longer have to struggle from day to day, well, what do? And in fact, some of the worst places for mental and physical dysfunction are these remote Indigenous settlements, which don't have an economic base, so almost no one has a job, everyone's on welfare, so they've got nothing to do all day long, and naturally it's a disaster, an absolute disaster. So it's a function of having things too good for too long in a kind of a material plenty in a spiritual drought.
Well, the Prime Minister had his own struggle because it took him about 30 hours on various planes to get here. So please give former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott a nice round of applause, everybody. And now my old friend, can I still call you an academic? I'm not sure if you're an academic anymore. A once academic, now I would say probably Hungary's biggest tourism booster, Mr. Peter Boghossian, everybody.
I'm a big fan. I love this place. I love Hungary. I actually genuinely do.
Yeah, well, you are the guy that originally connected me with the Danube Institute and really introduced me to this country. And you came here, I remember you came here a couple of years ago, and it was at the height of all of the woke craziness, and you basically said to me, Dave, you will not believe what is going on here. It is sane. It is thoughtful. People care. So this must be very rewarding for you, seeing what's happened here.
Yeah, it's great, and I've been incredibly fortunate to cultivate relationships with people, diverse, intellectually, ideologically diverse relationships with people I consider Rod a close friend, and so it's incredibly liberating to me to be here, to have I love having conversations with people, particularly if I disagree with them. It makes my life significantly more interesting, and so I just feel that there's just really no restriction on the kinds of things you can say and the stances you can take.
Which is fairly starkly different than the way Hungary's portrayed on the outside, that somehow dissent is not allowed here. As Balázs Orbán mentioned last night, we were at the Roger Scruton Cafe, and literally next door there's a communist cafe. So they're not closing these. I don't know that anyone was there, but...
Yeah, and that's, I think, when you're in a country, and I just think, just don't take that for granted, because it's a big deal, and you don't want to lose that. You don't want to lose that.
Can you tell people a little bit about your history? Because I think the first college gig that I ever did is probably about 11 or 12 years ago. It was with you. You were, I believe, an assistant professor of philosophy at Portland State. Did I get that right?
We did an event. Dave and I did an event. I think I've been on your show like six, seven times.
Yeah, you're up there.
Yeah, we did an event together. And God, that was so crazy. So when you do an event here, this is like, okay, this is very difficult for the Hungarian mind to grasp. When I do an event here, I walk in, I do the event, I walk out. I know, people are looking at me like, what is he talking about? Well, when we do an event, the security comes in, they have huge, remember those guys with huge riot shields? The SWAT team comes in, they have huge shields. They escort us behind to that little room there.
Yeah. Wait, if I could stop you for a second. Yeah. The interesting part really about this is that this is 11 or 12 years ago when Pete and I were certainly on the left politically. I had been a Democrat my whole life. I think you largely had been too. We thought we were going to a university to talk about freedom from a liberal perspective, and we're going to be greeted like heroes.
Correct.
And then we show up, and this happens.
Yeah, then we show up, and people were screaming at us, threatening to protest, threatening to firebomb the place. But what was really palpable to me was just the intense security presence. I mean, so when we walked from the back area, we were literally surrounded by buffed guys with shields protecting us at an American university, talking about free speech.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult. You really need to let that percolate to understand that. And so subsequently, we watched it.
They pulled fire alarms on us. It was quite an evening.
Yeah, they pulled fire alarms on us. Because that's what you do when you don't have evidence and argument. You have to make that up some other way. You have to pull the fire alarm. You have to call people Nazis. You have to say you're offended. You have to feign kind of, this is too much to bear. I need, they give the kids cookies and coloring books. So, but if you do that long enough, you damage yourself. If you do that long enough, you cripple your ability to engage ideas and people about things you don't agree with. That is the necessary offshoot of living a life like that. But I would argue it's even worse, because when you do that long enough, you also create institutions in your society to protect people from ideas. Mm-hmm. So it's a kind of vicious circularity.
What do you make of what I would call the sort of new alliance that we're seeing across the West that's really, I think it started with Donald Trump, who was in some sense not a political creature first, but a cultural creature, clearly not a traditional conservative. Most people think that in his pre-political self, he was kind of a New York City Democrat, if he aligned with anything politically. But now, even at CPAC today, I thought the political and philosophical diversity here is probably pretty wide. It's thought of as a conservative event, obviously. It's right in the name CPAC, but you're going to have libertarians there, you're going to have classical liberals, you're going to have more traditional religious conservatives. But in some sense, it's kind of everyone versus the woke at the moment. And that's why it was particularly nice to do this in Hungary, a place that has become kind of ground zero for that.
And so this is what I'm deeply concerned about. So we've had a derangement syndrome that has been cast over the West, and the Anglosphere in particular. Call it, and I just finished our friend Andrew Doyle's book, The End of Woke. It's a wonderful manuscript. But now it's in hospice. And my concern is that people, so you went from, I published a piece, Cultural 1.0. So Cultural 1.0, you had basically atheists versus Christians, whether or not evolution should be taught in schools, things like this. Culture War 2.0, you have a spell that's been cast over the whole society. Call it woke, call it critical social justice, call it what you will. And then you had every sane person think, what are you talking about? You don't know what a woman is? Is your mother a woman? It's so unfathomable to even think about that. So my deep concern is that now that we've pushed back this ideology and coalitions of people who have joined together, is that you can already start to see the infighting. You can already start to see the invective and the terms people use. So I would like to offer this as a way to think about the problem. Don't think about it in terms of right or left. Don't think about it in terms of conservative or liberal or Christian or atheist. Think about it as authoritarian versus non-authoritarian. Now, I'll give you one example, if I may. In the city of Seattle recently, Antifa and Trans-Tifa and other militant...
Do you want to explain what Trans-Tifa is for
No,
those who might be a
definitely
little
not.
confused? Yeah, we'll get to that with Travis Brown in a moment. Yeah.
They basically went crazy about Christians having... about Christians meeting. Now, I am a pretty hardcore atheist. If Christians want to meet, if they want to pray, if Muslims want to meet, if they want, anybody can meet. It's a free country. Nobody has the right to tell you what God to pray to, how to pray. There are those people who want liberty and cognitive liberty, and I consider myself one of them. I consider you one of them. I consider Rod one of them. It's not about the content of the belief. It's about your ability to live the life you want to live, to pray the way you want to pray. And my concern is that there's a kind of, we're beating down the authoritarianism on the left. And my concern is it's creeping up in other aspects of public life and public discourse, and that's going to fray those alliances.
So do you think it can hold? I mean, can you take a group of, say, disaffected liberals, someone like an Elon Musk, his entire life Democrat or apolitical largely, never voted Republican until the midterms 2 years ago, someone like, pot-smoking, mushroom-eating Joe Rogan, MMA fighting Joe Rogan, someone like Bobby Kennedy, who was a Democrat a year and a half ago, someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who ran as a Democrat 4 years ago, someone like me, someone like you. Can you take all of those people, bring them into the conservative fold, and can that actually hold, regardless of whether you talk about it as left or right or anything else? Is it just too weight-bearing?
No, I don't think I can. I don't think it can hold. There was a great picture of Donald Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK. God, who was the fourth person? I can't remember. And the caption was, "The Democrats won the election." So, you can define yourself in opposition to something only for so long. But when whatever it is that metastasizes, that's so ugly and so divisive and so hurtful to so many people, those things cannot sustain themselves on their own. They have to have a way to be propped up. That's why we have blasphemy laws. That's why there are political correctness. It's inherently not sustainable. And so the question is, what will people latch onto as our landscapes constantly change and emerge? I don't know the answer to that question, particularly with the advent of AI. I don't know what's going to happen. But I can tell you, in no uncertain terms, the world in a very short period of time is... Hello? The world in a very short period of time... Give me your phone. Tell them you're down here hanging out. The world in a very short period of time is going to be very different. And if we don't pave an ethical infrastructure and a way to deal with that and a way to talk to each other, it does not bode well. But the good news is it's not particularly difficult to do. We just listen to each other, try to understand each other's perspective, and use democratic processes. If you don't like a statute, don't rip it down. Go through the whatever means of democracy you have.
Yeah,
Dave, do you think it's time to cue up Peter's video, Street Epistemology?
I think it's time to cue up Peter's video, Street Epistemology. Let's go.
Did they say anything that would cause you to move one line over?
I don't think so, just because like I can definitely understand your criticisms.
He can't. How do you know? Hold on one second.
He's not black.
Oh, so you have to be black to understand.
Our situations, the reason why we got so harshly targeted is because we are black students on a PWI.
What's a PWI?
Primarily white institution.
Trans women should be legally treated as women. Tell me why you're strongly disagreeing.
Because I'm a molecular geneticist.
Things are a definition. Things mean things.
Like man and woman.
Yeah, trans women are women. See, you keep trying to get people caught up. What is your point?
Well, my goal is to figure out if the lines you're on are the lines that you should be on the basis of the reasons you have. So this is a confidence scale. We can do this with any claim you want. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. You've never seen that?
I've never seen that. Not unironically, no.
Have you heard that before?
That quote came out of Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist.
You recognize the quotation?
Yeah, it's a Kendiism.
I invite people to talk about the claim of the moment, which is America is racist.
It's the violence inherent within the system, to quote Monty Python.
The consideration of race should be removed from the college admission process.
Simply, there is no equal opportunity without equal outcomes. Because how else do you measure the opportunity being equal?
Quality of outcome is more important than equality of opportunity. Did you move because of something he said?
There is no point of an outcome without an opportunity.
Wow, Pete. I mean, there's so many things there because it's like we can sort of make fun of some of the ideas, and then there's parts of it that actually are scary when you see how it gets put into practice. But maybe a different tack at it would be, do you find when you're talking to these young people that everyone has just failed them, that their parents probably failed them and the educational institutions failed them and their advisors failed them, that across the board we can make fun of them for saying some of these things? You know, the two kids right up front that were saying that they were at a PWI, what was it, publicly white, primarily white institution or something? I mean, I'm going to guess they've probably dealt with very little racism in their lives in reality as Americans, but there's this desire for it, or this the desire for perceived oppression. But I can't really blame them for that. You have to blame who taught them that.
Yeah, I think, so I always do my best to be neutral, to not let my position be known in these events. But I think one of the things that I've learned is that, and Steven Pinker writes about this to Harvard psychologist, when you're often, if you believe things, it's not because you have evidence for it. It's because you think believing those things makes you a good person. So your moral mind overrides your rational mind. And we need to be extremely careful about this. You know, Paul Graham has a nice little article. He's a venture capitalist. The other part of the problem is that so much of our identity, we've consumed and we've made all of these things a part of our identity. And when something is a part of your identity, gay, black, white, so it doesn't matter what your identity is, it becomes very difficult to think clearly about those things. And so how do we move away from thinking about what our identity is? Okay, a separate question, but an important one. But there's no question whatsoever that our academic institutions have failed these kids. And they're ongoing in continuing to fail them. And for whatever you think about Trump, what he has done with smashing, I personally, my personal opinion is he has not gone far enough. But I actually genuinely believe that he has not gone far enough. Look, think about this. So he wants to take, if I may, are we out of time? What is the time?
We're right there. I don't think they're cutting us to commercial. But
okay, so he wants to take part of Harvard's endowment and give it to vocational education. I'm a big fan of vocational education, huge fan. That's grossly insufficient. Harvard and other elite universities, there was systemic discrimination, and it was against Asians. They systemically discriminated for decades against Asians. They would give them what's called a personality score. And the personality score is on their essays. If you just normed it out and just looking at Harvard, and you only looked at metrics, 52% of the incoming class would be Asians. 52%, more than half. I've asked 100 people what's the problem with that. No one can seem to tell me the problem with that. Whites would fall a little bit. Hispanics would fall a little bit. Blacks would fall from 13% to 0.9%. Okay, now I'm going to give you a thought experiment. I'm going to change the scenario. Instead of Asians being discriminated against, we know that for 20 years, just accept this as a thought experiment. We know that for 20 years, Harvard and other Ivy Leagues systemically discriminated against black people. We know that. You would have trouble finding me a single person in the United States who would say, oh my God, this is horrible. They need to be punished for this. Let's take their endowment. That's what I would do. I would divvy up their whole endowment through class action lawsuits funded by the government, and I'd give them to every single person who is discriminated against. I don't think he goes far enough. And after that, though, then bygones are bygones. You can go your own way. But you will not get one. You want to do this madness? You want to throw the society into a big cesspool? By all means, feel free, but not on one penny of federal funding.
Well, Pete, I now have to move you to this couch, which is going to start looking pretty weird in a minute or two if we put some more guests on there. Pete Boghossian, everybody. And now let me bring up filmmaker Travis Brown, who is, we are going to show a bit of his film Uncomfortable Truths, and then we will discuss what Trantifa is, but why don't we take a look first?
I think one of the reasons that all of this has got so far is that it's so crazy it doesn't sound like anyone could possibly think it. So when I started saying to people, you know, they are telling children that sex is a spectrum, people would think like, she has to be exaggerating, she's misunderstood something, they're not really saying that. Strangely, if they had been a bit less bizarre in what they were saying, we might have caught on to it sooner.
A California kindergarten teacher is facing outrage after discussing gender identity with her students.
Kindergartners came home very confused about whether or not you can pick your gender, whether or not they really were a boy or a girl.
Since 2017, the number of youth who identify as transgender has nearly doubled.
You can't tell what your gender is by looking at your body. Gender is something you feel on the inside.
When you were little, did you feel like you were trapped in the wrong body?
Yeah.
Apparently, the XXXY chromosomes are insufficient.
This man is preparing to give birth in one of the least LGBTQ plus friendly states in the US.
Pregnant women are celebrated, trans people are not.
Admiral Rachel Levine is a groundbreaking leader, public health champion, and an advocate.
Fox, the knees, and that's it. Fellas, Fox.
That was sweet, huh? Did you like that?
Well, I really wish we could do this old school Tonight Show where I could be drinking while watching some of this stuff because, I mean, it's so interesting. You know, I mentioned that quote from Douglas Murray at the top about that the barbarians will be at the gate and we'll be debating what gender pronouns to call them. I mean, that's the perfect trailer for that, right? I mean, the most disappointing one, I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was really our best science communicator since Carl Sagan, to watch him be unable to decide all this. I guess the first question really is, how did you even get involved in this madness?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the shortened version. I've been interested in ideologies and how they spread, primarily because I grew up in a kind of a fundamentalist sect of Christianity, and I was told what I could and could not say, could not think. And then I left that behind, and I thought I found a home in Seattle and then Portland with these liberal people, free-thinking people. It turns out I was very wrong, and this really came to a head in 2020 after George Floyd died and everyone was rioting. So I decided to make a film, actually a series on wokeness and just what was going wrong and why all of these people that I thought were so free and liberal and accepting were so exclusionary and so the opposite of what they claim to be. If you're a Republican, you're a bigot. If you voted for Donald Trump, you're a Nazi, basically. I mean, this is really not far from, it is actually true that many people in Portland would say things like this. And so I was basically tackling identity politics, and it's just always struck me as so fascinating that people can do just horrible things in the name of a belief system. I mean, people were rioting for 150 days straight in Portland. One guy actually got killed. Aaron J. Danielson was his name. So it's fascinating to me that this is a piece of human cognition that if they have the right ideology, they'll do anything. And now we're telling children that they can transition to become boys if they're girls or vice versa. And so that's really the reason I started talking about these things.
Yeah, what do you think, this is a sort of offshoot of a question that I asked Pete at the end there, but what do you think this says about the adults? To me, the epidemic that we are facing, and I'm guessing that you read Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, where she talks about the social contagion portion of this.
Right.
I have nothing but sympathy for the kid who has been brainwashed. I mean, 2 years old. My son right now, they're really I have twin 2-year-olds. They're into dinosaurs. And Luke always says to me, I'm a T-Rex. But it's if I started saying to him, yes, you are, and we're taking you to Jurassic Park, here we go, it would be my problem. But yet there are parents that have endorsed all of this stuff.
Yeah, even worse is if you would try to chop off one of his limbs and give him little T-Rex arms.
Right, those arms freak everybody out, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is phenomenal. It is certainly a failure of adults. I think it's beyond that, though. I mean, I certainly do feel bad for the kids because this does affect kids most negatively. It also affects women and gay people because they're essentially erasing gay people by wanting to trans them, essentially. So, yeah, it's a failure of adults, but I think it's a failure of society. And as Tony touched on a little bit, I think some of the underlying currents, I'm not religious, I'm actually an atheist as well, but I do worry about the decline of traditional religious structures because I do think that this is one of the key reasons that people are looking for something else, for something transcendent, and trans is it's literally in the word, trans. They do want to transcend their mundane daily lives. Some of them are suffering from gender dysphoria, or you could call it sex dysphoria or body dysmorphia, along with a host of other mental health issues. But yeah, the adults are not stepping up and saying, actually, get off of your phone, go outside and play, do some martial arts, do what you need to get well. They're not doing that. They're just affirming immediately, unfortunately.
Right. Do you think that's a result of just decades of helicopter parenting, and you're going to get you get an award if you come in fourth, and just sort of this? Well, as who's the author? The Coddling of the American Mind.
Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah. I asked Stella O'Malley this, who runs GenSpect, which is essentially a counter to WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They're basically just a bunch of activists, and they create the standards of care for everyone across the world. And Stella has created her own organization to counter that. I asked her this question when I was in Ireland doing some interviews for this, and she had actually written books prior to the influx of young girls identifying as trans. And I said, isn't this part of the problem, the helicopter parenting, et cetera? And she said, well, yes, actually, she's I think knows Jonathan Haidt, and they both have talked about this issue. So yeah, I mean, there's a host of reasons, and one of them is the helicopter parenting. One of them is constantly being on the devices and pretending to be avatars. And again, I think one of the underlying problems is this lack of meaning and a sense of purpose. And I think that's very difficult. It's very difficult to fix. It's I think one of the biggest problems that we face. I talked to Rod about this the other day here. Because many of us, myself included, we're not going to become religious. We're not going to find the answer in traditional religions. So then how do you fix this problem? I think that's a really hard question to answer. I think there are some answers, but it plagues us.
What do you make of the governmental component to this? Places like California, where they quite literally have been trying to pass a law that if a teacher if a parent does not what they call affirm the gender of a child, that the state could literally come in and take that child away. I mean, to me, chemically castrating a child would be the least affirming thing you could do if you were trying to affirm their gender, but they get everything backwards. I mean, that's the Orwellian nature of all of this.
Yeah, it's scary. Also in Oregon, I think girls at the age of 15 can get a double mastectomy, which means cutting off both of her breasts without parental consent. And they passed these laws kind of surreptitiously because they shoehorn them into what they call reproductive rights. Mm-hmm. That I'm not making that up. They say that this is somehow a reproductive right, essentially, because they're shoehorning in this other thing. And so, so there are obviously activists and politicians who are pushing that, and it's scary. Thankfully, there are a lot of people standing up and pushing back against it. But the U.S. is kind of last in this, maybe Canada too. The U.K. has largely moved on and doesn't want to do these procedures to children anymore.
What do you think is going to happen when the generation of kids who have been butchered and chemically castrated and even worse? I mean, some of the pictures that you can see online are just beyond imagination. I mean, what do you think is going to happen as the years go by, say a decade from now, when they realize what they've done to themselves? And we see a lot of detransitioners now, but what do you think is going to happen to the doctors, to the parents? I mean, there's a whole slew of people who this is going to fall on their doorstep.
Yeah, right. Unfortunately, I've talked with Peter about this and others. Unfortunately, I don't think too many of the doctors will be held to account. I think they certainly should be, but because of the laws that they have in place in the U.S. and somewhat in the U.K., they're essentially exempt because they basically trick these kids into thinking that they can give consent to, cut off body parts or take testosterone, and et cetera. So it's very difficult legally. There are some law firms that are now cropping up. I think there's one in Texas that helps detransitioners. But it's hard to say what will happen to them unless laws change and more people coalesce to fight against this. It's going to be tricky.
The movie is Uncomfortable Truths. Please give a nice round of applause to Travis Brown, everybody. And next up, my old friend and author and creator of the book, Live Not By Lies. You know him well here. Rod Dreher, everybody. Rod.
Hey, Dave.
Rod, it's good to see you. I would say you too. Oh, there's the book right there. All right. We are a professional operation over here. You too are another one who has fallen in love with Hungary, someone not from here that has seemingly fallen in love with the culture and the freedom and really everything that's going on here. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, that's right. I moved here permanently in 2022. I first came here when I was speaking at a free speech event, I think back in 2018. And we were invited, all of the speakers, we were all conservatives of some sort or another, to go meet with the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, afterward. And I thought, well, okay, we'll shake his hand, have a picture taken, and that'll be that. That man sat there with us for 90 minutes with no press aides around him and answered all of our questions. He didn't tell us you can or can't ask this, he answered them. And then he finished by saying, I hope all of you will consider Hungary your intellectual home. Consider Budapest the intellectual capital of conservatism. And I thought, well, that's sweet, but it'll never happen. It's in Central Europe. And then I started coming over here, first time for the Danube Institute as a fellow in 2021. I had been in Hungary for 3 weeks. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'm like, this is a great place. It is nothing like what the American media and the American government say it is.
What was your notion before that?
Oh, I thought, well, it's an authoritarian place. I know it's conservative, so I'll fit in there somewhat. But I thought people would be afraid. You wouldn't be able to speak out. People would fear the government. You get here, and it's not like that at all. I texted our friend Tucker Carlson from walking down Andrassy Avenue. I said, you have got to come here. There is a story in this country to be told, and it's a story that the media, our media, do not want to tell. He ended up coming at the end of the summer of 2021, spent a week broadcasting from Budapest, absolutely changed the narrative about this country among grassroots conservatives, not the Washington Republican elites, but among grassroots conservatives. And it's gone from there. Our friend Peter Boghossian, we hadn't met each other. We finally met in Budapest, but we have a mutual friend. So he texted me before he was invited. He was invited and considering coming over to MCC. And he said, I'm more or less liberal. I'm an atheist. Am I going to be uncomfortable there? I said, Peter, you will enjoy so much more freedom in Viktor Orban's Hungary than you have had there in Oregon in the U.S., So Pete comes, we finally meet. He was here a couple weeks before I was. He said, dude, you're exactly right. This place is great. So I'm glad that Budapest and Hungary are no longer a secret that the word is getting out. And I want to thank you for coming over, too, to spread the word, because it's not going to happen if Americans rely on the mainstream media to tell them about this country. In fact, they and the people in Brussels and the NGOs and all that, they have to demonize Hungary and Viktor Orban as a way to deflect accountability for their own failures to protect their borders, to protect families, to protect free speech.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. I think if I've learned anything in the years of doing this, it's that if the media and the machine is telling you something is awful, it probably isn't. And if it's telling you something is great, it probably is not great, right? It just lies every which way about everything. So that's why it's been so refreshing to come here and see. And I guess, it's interesting. Your book is called Live Not by Lies. Right. So it was quite a segue from Travis's movie to your book. We seem to live in a time where lies are pushed on us constantly. One of the things I cover on my show every day is just what has the government or the machine or MSNBC or CNN or Washington Post lied to us today about. Yet an awful lot of people are still consumed by the lies.
Sure. Well, the title of the book is a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great anti-Soviet dissident. He was, in his final communique before the Soviets sent him into exile in 1974, he told his followers, look, none of us can go stand in the middle of Red Square with a bullhorn saying, down with communism. That's unrealistic. So what can we do as everyday people to resist totalitarianism? One thing we can do is to stop living by lies. What he meant by that was, don't go to a speech where people can't dissent. Don't sign something you don't believe. Little things like that. Defend your dignity, and if over time enough people do it, then the system that is built on lies will collapse.
So it's basically to not participate in the grand lie, which everyone in an authoritarian regime sort of has to play ball with, and that's why you end up turning on your neighbor or literally your family member.
Right. Now, here's what's so interesting, Dave. Back in 2015, I was living in Louisiana, back in the States. I heard from a doctor from the Mayo Clinic who said, look, I've got to tell somebody this. My elderly mother was a political prisoner for 6 years in her homeland, Czechoslovakia, under the communists. They sentenced her to prison and tortured her for being a Vatican spy, by which they meant she wouldn't stop going to Mass when they told her to. She got out of Czechoslovakia, moved to America, lived her life there. Elderly woman now told her son, the things I see happening in America today at the beginning of the Great Awakening remind me of what happened when communism first came to my home country. Now, when I heard that, I thought, she's got to be exaggerating. But then I kept hearing it, Dave, from people who had come to America from Hungary, Poland, the Soviet Union, to escape communism. They're all saying, it's happening here. Mm-hmm. But the crazy thing about it was they knew that we don't have gulags, we don't have secret police. So what was the difference between what they had experienced in the past and what they were experiencing in America? And I wrote this book to explain the difference, and also I traveled in this part of the world talking to people who had stayed behind and resisted to get advice from them about what we in the West should do to resist.
Well, let's get to some of that advice. What's the fuller, more expanded quote from Solzhenitsyn? We know they're lying, they know they're lying, they know we know they're lying, and yet they continue to lie. And that seems to be exactly where we're at.
He could have said that about the New York Times.
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing. So what are some of the remedies to this? I mean, I think we're seeing them right here.
Yeah. Well, the core remedy that I got from everybody I talk to in this part of the world is you have to be prepared to suffer for the truth. That's it. I remember standing just off of Red Square in Moscow interviewing an elderly Russian Baptist leader. And he looked me in the eye and said, you go back to America and you tell the church that, because he was talking about the church. He said, if you're not prepared to suffer for the truth, you're not going to make it. And it's true not just for the church, but for everybody. You have to be willing to pay a price to stand up for the truth. And that is something that's pretty hard to do. And look, the line between those who are courageous and those who aren't doesn't go between political parties or religious and non-religious. I interview a woman in the book, Kamila Bendova. She and her late husband, Václav, were the only religious people, they were Catholics, in the inner circle around Václav Havel and the Charter 77 people in communist Czechoslovakia. And I remember asking her in her apartment, I said, Camilla, was it hard for you and your husband as political conservatives and as religious people to be allied with all these hippies? You know, and she said, no, Rod, not at all. You have to understand that when you're facing communism, the most important thing you need is courage, or all totalitarianism. You need courage. Most of our fellow Catholics didn't have it. They kept their heads down just like everybody else. These hippies knew that they had to stand up. My husband and I knew as Catholics we had to stand accountable to God for what we did in this test. And so we knew those hippies were going to be our allies, and they knew they could count on us too. And this is why you see this odd and wonderful coalition of a religious conservative like me, a liberal atheist like Peter Boghossian, but I respect and like Pete because he's all about the truth. We may not agree on what the truth is, but we both agree that you have to have freedom to talk about things.
Dave, we have a video clip from Rod's books.
Yeah, we have a
Let's
movie.
throw to a video clip.
Yeah, there's a documentary on angel.com now, 4-part documentary based on this.
Fantastic.
Let's cue it up.
1984 famously describes what could be called hard totalitarianism. But material deprivation or the threat of imprisonment and death don't always pose the greatest danger to the people. It's often the softer, mental manipulations that threaten to enslave them forever. It's a process of collective gaslighting that destroys all sense of objective reality in order to create a new, single source of truth. If Big Brother says that 2 + 2 = 5, then it must be true. If the state says that it's necessary to lock yourself in your house and police your neighbors, they no longer have to do it for you. Undoubtedly, the people of Eastern Europe lived the Orwellian nightmare. And with Isabel von Spruce and others being prosecuted for the thoughts that they hold in their heads, this hard totalitarianism seems to be creeping into the West. But the Orwellian vision of a totalitarian nightmare has been subverted and replaced by its decadent sibling. In Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, we see a vision of soft totalitarianism that anyone in the West can recognize today. In this society, everyone has what they want. Everyone is quote-unquote happy. And yet, they are not free. Because in a soft totalitarian society, comfort is the new gulag.
Ooh, chilling.
Yeah, it's a strange quote, isn't it? Or a strange way to state it. But it was right here in Budapest when I was researching Live Not by Lies that I understood the core of soft totalitarianism, what we're dealing with, by talking to my friend Anna. She was my interpreter as we were going through the city. And she said to me, Rod, you know, I have so much trouble talking with my friends, even my fellow Catholics, about the things I struggle with. If I tell them, my husband and I have been fighting lately, they'll jump in and say, you've got to get a divorce. You've got to go back to work. You've got to be happy. And she said, I tell them, wait, I am happy, but a happy life is not necessarily a life that is without friction. But they don't understand it. I looked at her and said, Anna, it sounds like you're fighting for your right to be unhappy. She said, that's it. Where did you get that? It's in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Unlike Orwell, which is a hard totalitarianism based on fear and pain, Huxley's dystopia is based on the provision of total comfort and entertainment. Anything that allays your anxieties, the only cost is your humanity and your freedom. To stand up to that form of totalitarianism requires the ability to suffer and to accept limitation and pain. That's why the dissident in Huxley's Brave New World is the one guy who is willing to accept suffering. That's our problem now. That's why comfort is a new gulag. We're like Huxley. We're not like Orwell. We're like Huxley.
Right. So in some sense, you don't need a physical prison because we have a digital prison right here. We have the endless doom scrolling that is keeping us satiated to some extent. We're going to take a 10-minute intermission, but before we do that, you have to leave us on some bit of a positive, hopeful note.
Well, yeah, I one of the reasons.
Or are we just all going to the digital prison and then we can leave everybody hanging for 10 minutes?
Well, living here in Central Europe and in Hungary, as I do, One of the reasons I moved here is because I wanted to live in a society that had lived under totalitarianism and has become somewhat immune to what we're going through in the West because of that experience. I wanted to know more about it. I want people in the West, in America, Britain, Western Europe, to come to Hungary, or go to Poland, Czechoslovakia, or Czech Republic, Slovakia, all of these countries, and talk to actual people who lived under communism and ask them what they think about wokeness. There is a way to escape this mental prison that we're all in the West, and you can do it by, instead of going on vacation to Western Europe, come here to Central Europe and talk to people. That's all. There are good examples, especially here in Hungary, that shows we can resist this. But it requires being willing to stand up and be demonized, as Viktor Orban has been, for the sake of the truth and defending your own country and your traditions.
That's how you go out to intermission. Please give Rod and all my guests a nice round of applause. And we'll take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back. Thank you, guys. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I know we're running a little late here. We have 3 more guests, so why don't we get right to it. Please allow me to welcome Senator Maria Fernanda Cabal, Senator from Colombia. Senator, it's good to have you here. We met just momentarily in the hallway earlier today. I have to say, I don't know a tremendous amount about your country's politics, so why don't I give you an open-ended, that's not even a question, it's a commentary. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in Colombia and maybe how it relates to some of the issues that we've been talking about here tonight.
I'm coming from Colombia, South America. My country has had a violent history since its foundation, since 200 years ago. It's not new. We had some time where we got a peace that does not last long. And currently, we face again the same threat as before, and it is drug trafficking. We are the main cocaine exporter in the world. We have 300,000 coke crops, hectares, 300,000 hectares of coke plant. And we have a communist president. How come? We never thought that the communists would reach presidency because our society is very conservative, despite that since very long time ago, the name is Comintern, the International Communist Policy, I don't know how you say that, the Comintern, they spread their propaganda and they trained people from all America, not just Latin America. Since the 20th, it's amazing, since the 20th, the Russians were promoting communism, and it turned into guerrillas in the 60s. Latin America had 420 guerrilla movements. Nobody knew that. And in Latin America, there's no more guerrilla except in Colombia. Our government, is not my government, but the government, not this government, it was 8 years ago, signed a peace agreement and sold the world that we finally got peace, and that former president, last name Santos, won the Nobel Peace Prize. We never got peace. Now we have 800.
In essence, this was a peace deal sort of signed with the guerrillas who...
It was a peace agreement, a peace accord with FARC.
Yeah.
Now FARC has a split in many arms. We have 800 groups controlling partially or totally 600 municipalities. War has grown because criminality has mutated. Why? Because it's transnational, not local anymore. We export Colombia, unfortunately, cocaine through Venezuela, which has the cartels, Cartel de los Soles. We have Mexican cartels in Colombia. We have the 2 oceans, the Caribbean, the Pacific. So our geostrategical position is it's a benefit for criminals. So exporting cocaine, exporting minerals, importing weapons, illegal weapons, and also remember that our country is a country where the illegal migrants has to cross over to get into the Darien Gap. And through the Darien Gap, they were getting to the U.S. And the main problem of migration, that in their narrative was like a romantic way of changing the life of people that has no hope, turned to be a weapon. Weapons of Mass Migration is a book from Berkeley University, which is not a conservative university, but finally they make a scientific study that explains how all this false goodness turn into a weapon in our free societies.
Wow, there's a lot of different ways we can go there. I mean, do we have any idea the amount of people that were coming through that were then picking up drugs and then bringing them into, obviously, other South American countries, but really to the United States?
No, I remember an American journalist that might be a friend of you or of some of you that went like 2 years into the Darien Gap. His name was Michael Young. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he documented it, and he has, for example, a number of children. How do you say that kidnapped or
the child trafficking?
Child trafficking, but there is an adjective that says I don't remember. It's like child trafficking, but also they disappeared the children. They said that in 5 years, 75,000 children disappeared from the Darien Gap. So it was the business that afterwards were shown in the movie. The movie that it was a famous movie. Sound of Freedom. Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. So I don't know how many, but the problem it's all the time. Thanks to President Trump and his decision to stop completely the migration, you don't see what you see in the beaches before. Mm-hmm. It was full of Africans, Chinese, Indians from India. It was full of people that you know the locals never saw on their lives, and full of money because you see dollars buying everything until they got up, either or crossing the Darien or either taking boats that had made business of taking people to Guatemala or to Mexico. So it was really a big business.
So what brings you to Hungary?
CPAC. I'm the most voted senator as a woman in Congress, conservative, the most voted in history. This is my second time in Senate, but before I started in the House. So this is my third time in Congress. But I visited CPAC, Washington, before it gets internationally. So 13 years ago, I visited the first CPAC at Washington, D.C. I didn't know anybody, but it was like oxygen. When I visited first time CPAC, I said, oh my God, there's hope. There's hope. There's NGOs who really have common sense. There's NGOs that doesn't take racial or social justice concepts just to keep twisting society. I have been fighting since 16 years ago against NGOs that instead of helping in the war, they are the face to take legal money to help the illegals.
So now that the United States has closed the border, and obviously things are changing in South America, and obviously the routes to get money and children and however they're human trafficking these people through, well, how has that affected your country now?
No, I think the cutoff of the illegal migration, of course, it's much better for us, because now we are dealing with a communist president that destroyed the army. We had a strong army before, destroyed the police, destroyed the intelligence. He is a climate change fanatic, but he flies in his airplane all the time through the world. He stopped the exploration of oil. We have oil, we have gas, we have coal, carbon, we have everything. We are a very rich country in minerals, in energy, but he decided to stop exploring. So all the prices raise up, especially for the poor people. We are importing gas instead of producing it. So this guy is evil. This guy is risking the future of our country. And in 1 year, there is elections. So I'm in the opposition. I'm a voice who raised and is heard everywhere. I have one of, or I think the most powerful social media without investing any dime. And I have many good friends in the US and in Israel, and I hope we could restore the future of Colombia.
Well, you mentioned two times in Congress, one time in the Senate. Does that mean a presidential run is in the offing here?
2 in Senate, 1 in the House.
Okay.
So I'm going to complete three how do you say, terms in Congress. And I tried to run 2 years and a half inside my political party, but they kicked me out. They had another person that they favored, even though that I had higher numbers. So this is my second time to run. First, I need to beat the candidates of the same political party. Mm-hmm. You call that like
primary.
A primary. First, I have to win, and then we have an election that we could go along with another parties or movement. Then the first run-off, and then the second. The first runoff is in May, and the second is in June of 2025.
Well, if you will have me down there, I will gladly come down. And just as I've explored what's happening here in Hungary, I'd love to do the same in Colombia.
You're near. You're near.
I live in Miami. I basically live in Colombia.
He lives in Miami. It's 3 hours from Bogota. You can go for a weekend. Of course, we would love to have you there, and you will see a marvelous country, always threatened by challenges that in the past we have overcome. So we cannot lose the faith.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but in Miami, we call it North-South America because we have so many Cubans and Venezuelans and Colombians and everybody else, and it's just the northern tip of South America.
And you have the conservative Latins.
Oh, yeah. You want to
hang out. You don't have the socialist Latins. You have the conservative Latins that loves family, believe in God, and they voted Trump.
Those are the Cubans that I'm drinking mojitos with on the weekends. Please give a nice round of applause.
Thank you.
To Senator Cabal. All right, we've got two more for you, and we will bring up one of your countrymen at the end. But first, let me bring up Lord David Frost, please. The Honorable Lord David Frost, I should say. I'm looking forward to chatting with you because you were one of the architects, or I would say chief defenders of your country when it came to Brexit. And clearly, a nation with sovereign borders that can make some decisions for itself without the overarching reach of the EU is something that these people here in Hungary care about deeply and seemingly have done correctly to the best extent that they can. How did that even fall in your lap? Did you think that this was going to be something you were fighting for? And how do you think it worked out, I suppose?
Yeah, I got lucky, I think is the simple answer. I spent most of my life as a professional diplomat, got into politics through the Brexit referendum, then Boris Johnson sort of chose me as his Europe advisor, and I ended up doing the negotiations. So no, it was complete chance, really. I was, the right person who thought the right things at the right time. And, Britain has got a lot of things wrong, I think, in recent years, and is still getting a few things wrong, and you referred to that earlier, but we got one thing right, which is to restore ourselves as a sovereign country. again, to be able to take our own decisions and to become a proper democracy where we can decide things for ourselves once again. And unfortunately, we've made some bad decisions as well as a few good ones, but it's still better to make your own mistakes and correct them than be stuck in a sort of semi-super state where you're constantly battling for your rights, but you don't really have control.
So where are you in that adventure? If we're telling a story right now, where are you in that story? I mean, do you feel that there is an escape route fully? I mean, there's still just so many tentacles and the border situation and everything else.
Yeah, we still have Northern Ireland is partly under the control of the EU still. Unfortunately, that's one thing that's still got to be dealt with. The big problem we have with borders is not that we don't have legal control. We do have legal control of our borders. You know, first of all, we allowed immigration just to get too high. You know, we just let too many people in, set the criteria too generously, and that's why we've had, 5 million people here in the UK in the last 4 years, and it's very visible. Then we have this other problem that Tony referred to of people just coming across the channel, and we can't stop them. And a sea border is extremely difficult to police, but at the moment we're not really trying. And this is... Migration is the issue probably that is winding people up in Britain most. It's most visible on the streets. It's driving, kind of anti-system politics quite strongly because people look at the main parties. I mean, I'm a member of the main party, of the Conservative Party, but they look at both parties and they say, you're simply not dealing with this problem. And that's what's driving the protest at the moment.
You mentioned both parties, so where does that leave Nigel and his party, which has obviously gained some momentum?
Yeah, he's doing very well at the moment. I think a lot of people have counted him out over the years, and yet he's kept coming back. And, in a way like Boris Johnson, he's able to kind of, he's a charismatic figure. He can kind of tap into what people think. He can respond. He can kind of empathise. And he does that very well, and people are turning to him. And at the moment, the Reform Party has a polling score that's twice as high as the Conservative Party. We'll have to see if that kind of lasts as things play out, but he is responding to the problems that people actually see for themselves, and it's paying off for the moment.
I'll tell you a funny story about Nigel Farage. A few weeks after Brexit, I was in London and I got a call. So they said, Nigel wants to have breakfast with you. And we went to a pub, which I thought was odd. We were having breakfast at a pub, but we went to a pub. They opened it up for us. It was just the two of us. And breakfast with Nigel Farage is 2 gin and tonics that are bigger than this microphone here and 2 bottles of wine. And I had to go an hour later and give, at that time, what was the biggest speech of my life at Oxford University. And 4 shots of espresso later, I gave what I think is the best speech I've ever given. So he's done some good, I suppose.
That's what it takes. I think he's sort of become a bit more disciplined over the years. So
I certainly hope so. So culturally, why is it that it seems to me that the British, who have such an unbelievably rich history and who repelled the Nazis, and we could go into the laundry list of things that your countrymen have done, seem unable to defend their own culture?
I'm not sure everyone would see it quite like that. I mean, everybody, it's very visible, certainly in the big cities, that, there's been a lot of migration from the developing world in the last few years. And I think one of the things that makes it so visible is it's quite jarring. The kind of culture clash is quite strong and it's quite visible. You'll see a kind of half-timbered Tudor house with a sort of Turkish barber sign stuck on the front. Right. Or, you'll have, a bunch of Deliveroo drivers playing Pakistani or Indian music sitting in front of, a war memorial. And this kind of jarring nature of the culture clash makes it really visible to people, I think, and that's part of what's driving it. There's no doubt that parts of our cities have changed a lot, and people, put up with it. I don't know how happy with it everybody is, but I remain optimistic. People in Britain are quite gloomy and pessimistic at the moment, but as you say, we've got a tradition of fighting back. Often we kind of do the wrong thing till the last moment and then somehow recover ourselves and manage to put it right in the end. And I think that's what's going to happen in this case. I don't think we're going to see much more migration once we get rid of this wretched Labour government. And I do think the strength of the country's culture, history, achievements, there's a lot to play on. There's a lot we can do to bring people together again. But at the moment, it just isn't happening.
Right. So if you stem the tide of immigration and the migrants and everything, it seems to me there's still an issue with either the homegrown version of it or the amount of people that are just illegally there that then you would have to deport. I mean, do you think the country has the wherewithal to do what needs to be done? If you agree with the premise.
Yeah, I mean, it is a controversial issue that, we don't really know how many people are in the country illegally. It's probably 1 million plus. Could be significantly more than that. Who knows? And it has this question of who do we deport everybody? Do we allow some to stay? That is controversial in polling. Even on the right, because somebody who's a child of people who came illegally, somebody who's been here a very long time and settled. It's not kind of obvious all these cases, but I think the general. One of the things that worries me really with the way politics has gone in Britain is, people's tolerance is wearing quite thin. I have personally heard more kind of openly racist comments from people in the last year, just casually, than I've heard probably in the rest of my life. And to me, that's a sign that people are kind of getting wound up, and we need to find a way of of calming that. And some of it is certainly deporting, a large number of people who need to be here, and some of it is stopping the flow, stopping the boats, stopping people coming in legally or illegally.
I spoke to your former prime minister, very short-lived prime minister, Liz Truss, this afternoon, who I think had 50 days, if I'm not mistaken, before the government fell. I mean, that was a short tenure. One of the things that she was talking about was that she was trying, and this is her perspective, I can't speak to the truth of it, was that she was trying to do a lot of these things, but that basically the Conservatives were just too squishy to actually make anything happen.
So I think she is basically right. The Conservative Party, sadly now, is quite divided between, what I would say is genuine Conservatives and people who are more on the kind of liberal centrist worldview. I think, unfortunately, Liz did make a few mistakes of execution as well that probably don't help. But where I think she was right was that the country needs to get on a different path. It needs to get growing again economically. It needs to control migration. It needs to do lots and lots of things. And she tried to do that and perhaps went at it too quickly and didn't realise the level of opposition, didn't go about it as well maybe as she could have done. But it still needs doing. We're 3 years further on now. All these things have got worse. Economic growth is declining, migration is continuing. All these things have got worse, and people can see it. You can't hide that from people, and at some point, the political system is going to respond to that.
So, all of that being said, last question for you: what brings you to Hungary, and what do you see here that you would like? I think there's some obvious answers to that, especially on the immigration front. But what do you see here that you'd like to replicate back home?
So, to me, at least in recent years, Hungary has been a kind of, intellectual refuge, I suppose. The people who come to Hungary, who can meet in Hungary, the kind of intellectuals, thinkers on, all kinds of the conservative right, and not even only on the right, but, it's become a place where you can come, meet interesting people, talk interesting thoughts in freedom, and that's not so common, sadly, as it used to be across Europe. So that's why I keep coming.
The Honourable Lord David Frost, everybody. All right, and our final guest on the show today, I sense in this country he needs no introduction, Hungarian artist and musician Ákos. Ákos!
Sir. Liz Truss was in for 44 days.
44 days. I gave her 6 extra days. I guess we're going to throw to one of your videos before we begin. So, you know, we've talked obviously here a lot about politics and philosophy and borders and immigration and things of that
I'm ready
nature.
to continue that.
You're ready to continue that? Well, maybe
if you will. Yeah.
No, well, I'd like to switch it maybe for a moment, and perhaps all things get back to that. But as an artist and as a musician, I can clearly see you're hitting some tone with this crowd, some note with these crowds that's important. Tell me a little bit about that portion of Hungary, maybe that we don't know about from the outside.
Well, I'm something of a household name in Hungary, which comes with its upsides and downsides as well. It's very interesting for me to be able to be around. I've been around for 37 years as a singer, songwriter, performer, producer, and so forth. And you can obviously ask what keeps you that long in a genre that's about the moment.
Yeah.
And it is that you have something to say, you talk to people, and you have a response which is emotional, basically, and it's. Of course, there's a political division in Hungary just as well as in the United States and everywhere else. But still, we can get on common ground, and there's a togetherness whenever I get on stage. Of course, I've been called names. I've been the subject of cancel culture, been called a Nazi long before any of you peasants. So we're right in the thick of it, right? We just started, and we're in the thick of it right now.
The fact that that's become a joke these days, Hitler was probably going, man, Nazis are just not what they used to be.
Those are not even real Nazis, we would say. Yeah. So, well, as long as inspiration is up and the public's interest is alive and well and kicking, I mean, there's no reason to step down.
Yeah.
I have stuff to say, apart from the holy trinity of love lost, love regained, unattainable love. That's what pop music is all about in general. But if you follow people like yourself, I'm an avid viewer of yours, I have to admit.
Thank you.
And it's true, by the way. So, and if you care about the world, which doesn't mean the environmental agenda, but you really do care, because I have 4 kids. Presumably, I'll have grandkids someday. I worry about them. I worry about the world, what they will inherit from us. And have we been good enough caretakers for? So if you have these thoughts and you watch people like yourself, you can worry your ass off. By the way, so it's there's plenty of inspiration coming from the world. It's not that the world is not providing enough material if you worry about it.
Yeah.
So
do you think that's made it easier or more difficult to be an artist, regardless of the type of art, whether you're making ceramics or painting or music or whatever? That we've had. I talk about it on my show all the time. That I listen to the same music that I've been listening to for the last 20 years. That if I can't
people want to hear the same music.
Yeah,
all
people.
Over again.
Yeah, that from an American perspective, we haven't had just a new renaissance of music. I think something's coming. I do sense that because of the cultural shift that we've now had.
You have a prune of a rocker in office, right?
Yeah.
I mean, on stage.
Yeah. So that things
I like,
might
and
start.
His music is really great, but the stupid remarks are just.
They are what they are.
Yeah.
But do you sense that there is going to be sort of an artistic resurgence where we'll start, we see, and again, I'm giving you from an American perspective, but every time a new art installation is unveiled in one of our cities, it's this either brutalist art, or did you see, it's uglier, or maybe some of you saw the giant, they put up in Times Square, which is the crossroads of the free world, a statue of an obese, the only way to describe it was an obese, angry black woman. That's what it was.
Looking at her phone.
Yeah, who was looking at her phone.
The same in Florence.
Yeah.
By the same artist.
Right, exactly.
By the same.
So what do you make of that? And what do you think of the ability for art to get us out of this rut?
I'm a real conservative, I'm sorry to say it. And, or I'm proud to say, whichever way you choose. So I think there is going to be a resurgence. There's going to be a turn back towards religion and God in Europe. In lack of that, if that never happens, we're doomed. That's my personal opinion. So I think religious comeback is on the verge, and I really hope that, because there's no other hope for me and for my kind, I think.
Well, let's see some hope. We have another clip.
Pray as you may, but they will betray your trust and laugh as it turns into all but dust. If you just refuse to lose, you're sure to get the blues. Your constant need to succeed will surely make you bleed. You should realize that you've been scrutinized all along by the same old watchful eye. The spies that you despise fed you lies.
You cut away from the chorus. It's a crime.
I could see Jordan Peterson playing that before one of the shows. The message that I just got
lies,
in that, yeah.
Live not by lies, even Rod's book.
How important is it to convey a message of truth when you're creating something?
What else can you do? I mean, if this genre I'm working in, it really opens you up to the public, of course. And if you do not open yourself up, then you stick to generalities that are the part of this genre. So I cannot think of any other way of
But it might sell you a lot of albums or get you on the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this song, as you might imagine, was recorded and shot a few decades and a few pounds ago. Around 2002, when the House of Terror, the museum where it was shot at, was open. And this song is called Lies. The spies that you despise fed you lies, is in direct correlation with the theme of the museum, which commemorates the victims of the Nazi and the communist regime in Budapest. And there was a huge counterwind when the political will arose to bring this whole idea to life, that in the very building where the Nazis, the Hungarian Nazis and the Hungarian communists stayed, and that was their headquarters, and that's where they tortured and killed people, there's going to be a museum in the very building there. And one day my phone's ringing, and this voice says that we want music from you for a museum. I said, music for a museum? What kind of stupid idea is that? And if they have this idea, why don't they call somebody else? You know, the usual names, the big names that they usually call. I was young at the time, or, well, not that young, but still not where I am now. And slowly but surely I understood what they wanted with this museum. They wanted this museum like it was a film, like the aim was a certain catharsis, if you don't mind the word. So it was to bring in people and have pictures and messages stuck in their minds and when they leave, they just shoot their own movie about this whole horrible story that happened to Hungary in the 20th century, mid 20th century. It's just insane that we have double occupation. We were occupied by the Nazis, we were occupied by the Soviets, and those forces, the Nazis and the commies, could never have come to power without armies stationed here, because Hungarians are just not prone to vote for these. Of course, there is a certain amount of the populace that would vote that way, but they could never have come to power without outside help. And this is just written in the Hungarian psyche somehow. So we read between the lines. That's why CPAC is in Hungary, in my opinion. That's why all these conservative speakers and decision makers and politicians are here now. That's why everybody's talking about an intellectual refuge when they talk about Hungary. This is why. Because we were occupied, we were maimed after the First World War, the Great War. As a nation, as a territory, as an entity right in the heart of Europe. It was a driving force, and the outside forces, Western forces and Eastern, they never wanted Hungary to be the strength it could be or it might have been in historical times. And that's very, very important. That is know your geography, know your history. Without that, you will never understand. That's why I try to teach my 4 children. Know your geography. Without geography, you'd never understand the Ukrainian war or the Second War, whichever war you're thinking about, you'd never understand that. That's where, sorry to say, American education seems to be lacking. Mm-hmm. But that's intentional, of course.
Of course.
So the students are failed by their teachers. And the tendency is here in Hungary as well, but it's not alive and well like it is in academia in the United States. So it seems for a Hungarian who is just a follower of certain YouTube stations, and I don't know anything about anything, I'm just a pop musician. So, take this with a pinch of salt.
No. Well, I love that answer. I mean, Andrew Breitbart famously said that politics is downstream from culture. So if you can capture the culture through art, well, then you might be able to change some minds. Let's throw to one final clip. Talk about moving imagery. Tell me a little bit about the film.
It's a short film, so it's a 27-minute film, which is about written, directed by yours truly, and I wrote the original soundtrack to the short film, which is doing the festival rounds, the festival circuits, and it had some modest success abroad, from Shanghai to Toronto, from Abruzzo to Milan, from Brno in the Czech Republic to Bucharest in Romania. So now we have a few laurels, when they show the film. But it's not that. It might put a spotlight on the film, these awards and everything. But biggest award is seeing teary-eyed people in movie theaters, and I had the chance many times to sit with them and watch the movie with them. And it's a 27-minute walk through Hungarian history in say, mid-20th century to now. It's an elderly taxi driver who's telling stories, and whichever story he tells, he just conjures them up. And we are traveling with him in a taxi that has locked doors. We cannot get out, and we have to. And as long as he takes us to our destination, he talks us through his own life, his own experiences, and images of history. And it just touched people. So that's the biggest award. Or you can say the big reward, not an award, was when in Toronto we got a so-called audience feedback video, where people from all kinds of creeds, race, you name it, ages, walks of life, they talk about the movie they watched. And they talk about my movie over the pond with the same enthusiasm as Hungarian viewers or ourselves who made the movie with a tiny cast. We're really enthusiastic about our thing. And it's just so, it's an auteur film, okay? It's like an art house film, very much unlike Hunyadi and the Raven film. That's an action-packed thing.
Not art house, yeah.
That's not art house, but that's very successful at that. Ours is more of a, more imagery and, so whatever. I mean, you watch it one time. I sent your people the link. When you have 27 minutes, just flip it through. So the big thing is that these people in Canada, they're talking about our movie, and the key points for them are the same key points that we would like the audience to have, to bring home and to think on and on. And the other thing was Rod, who is fiddling with his phone now, and he was in Hungary when Live Not by Lies was first publicly shown to the people, and we had a public appearance together. We talked about the book together, and I invited him into the studio to watch the movie first and check the subtitles if I did them right. A native speaker, you always need a native speaker to check the subtitles. And he watched the movie through and through. And I remember that you were teary-eyed. Were you teary-eyed, Rod? Yet he was very teary-eyed afterwards. And he said, and I asked him, what is it like? And he says, teary-eyed, Wim Wenders. Wim Wenders happens to be a boutique director, a darling of the auteur, an art house movie scene, Palme d'Or in Cannes, and so forth. He has become a big name. And I was so proud that and then I asked him, I told myself, this Alabama guy, how does he know about Wim Wenders? And this is not the way I asked him. I just asked him, how do you know about Wim Wenders? How do you know this name, this auteur of films? He says, haven't I told you? I've been a movie critic for the New York Post for 10 years. So unknowingly, I showed, is that true? Almost.
10 years, and I'm from Louisiana.
Whatever. I'm sorry. You're ruining my joke, my story.
Can we do the fact checking after the show?
All right, fact check. I'm sorry then. So this is how I remembered it. So how does it get? And he goes, so unknowingly, I showed my film to a film buff, a film critic, a man who's an expert in films. And it was just really, well, that was some experience. So I was very proud that day. Louisiana, I'm sorry.
Well, it looks very powerful, and I have at least a 9-hour flight on the way home, so I think I can watch a 7-minute movie many times.
Use it well.
I do have a future idea for live shows, which is we should have a fact checker on the fly. Could you imagine if late night talk shows had a fact checker every time a celebrity said something that didn't make sense?
And you can watch it 18 times on the flight back home.
At least 18 times. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been an absolute pleasure. I think I was trying to run the numbers in my head. I think I've done something like 4,000 episodes of the Rubin Report. I've never done a single episode before tonight without doing at least a mini run through where we saw what we were going to do beforehand. And I've definitely never had 10 guests on one show. So I'd like to thank all of my guests. I'd like to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Appreciate it, and we'll be having some dinner in a little bit. Thank you guys very much. Thank you. Thank you.